Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the first of Rabbi Richard Adres' three presentations under the title, Living Longer, Living Better, How Jewish Text and Tradition Can Help Navigate the Revolution in Longevity. I'm Chava Tior Samuelson. I'm the Director of Jewish Studies at ASU. I'm also Irving and Miriam Loeb Professor of Modern Judaism and Regents Professor of History. The Center for Jewish Studies is committed to the dissemination of knowledge about Jewish civilization from antiquity to the present, and we try to do it from a variety of perspectives, including history, sociology, political science, philosophy, comparative literature, cultural studies, and even the arts. Jewish Studies consist both of undergraduate program that gives a BA major in Jewish Studies as well as a certificate in Jewish Studies, but we are primarily focusing on public outreach, like the program that you are experiencing right now. So we believe in lifelong learning, and we are very glad that you decided to take some time from your daily schedule to be with us. The month of February has been very active for us. Last week, on February 16th, we featured Professor Joel Gerabov for a talk about Jewish historical societies. A week earlier, on February 9th, we hosted Dr. Sandra Fox from New York University for a talk about Jewish summer camps. These presentations were based on extensive academic research according to the methods of Jewish studies, namely the academic study of Judaism. In the lecture series that we are going to be privileged to participate this Monday and the following 2 Mondays, we are going to take a slightly different approach. With the help of Rabbi Richard Adres, we are going to devote attention to Jewish religious texts that frame human experience of aging. Rabbi Adres, both three talks by Rabbi Adres are going to be more textual and some even pragmatic because they consider kind of basically how to age and how to do so wisely. And they're going to be less historical and I assume less academic from by comparison to what you've experienced in previous presentations of the center. Rabbi Adres will share with us text, ideas, ideals that pertain to the experience of aging, an experience that awaits all of us. Taken from the Bible, the Talmud, and I assume also post-Talmudic texts, maybe philosophical, maybe Kabbalistic, I don't know. I'm looking forward to hear. We are going to really try to figure out the particular Jewish path toward the experience of aging or through the experience of aging. A word about Rabbi Adres. Rabbi Adres is the founder and director of Jewish Sacred Aging, a forum for the Jewish community. This is available online, so you can just Google it, www.jewishsacredaging.com, and you will find a lot of resources available for your use. Rabbi Adres is a Reform rabbi ordained by Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion. He was ordained in 1972. He has served congregations in California and New Jersey, and he has also served on the staff of the Union for Reform Judaism. He's done so quite a long time, from 1978 until 2011. He served as a regional rabbi and then is the founder and director of the Department for Jewish Family Concerns. Rabbi Adres is the author of Seekers of Meaning, Judaism, Baby Boomers, and the Pursuit of Healthy Aging, that came out in 2011. The book explores the notion of caring community and its relevance for baby boomers who are struggling with issues of aging and, of course, mortality. Rabbi Adres teaches at Hebrew Union College in New York and also in the certification program on gerontology and palliative care at the Wurzweiler School of Social Work at Yeshiva University. He has extensive knowledge and experience dealing with various dimensions of healthcare and hospice care, and he kindly shares his expertise in workshops and seminars in various congregations, and those seminars and workshops focus on the implications of longevity today, and that's really the focus of the lecture series for us. So this afternoon, he's going to, the title of his presentation is Sacred Text as Guides for Our Sacred Journey. Rabbi Adres, the screen is yours. And if anybody has questions, comments, and put them in the Q&A chat or Q&A button on your screen. And we are now all looking forward to learning from Rabbi Adres. All yours.
Thank you, Dr. Samuelson. Hi, good afternoon from the East Coast. Well, it's 2 hours now in Phoenix, right? And I already get confused. So good afternoon to all of you. Hello, and thank you to Lisa for putting all the tech stuff together. It's nice to be with you, and I look forward to these couple of weeks with you of learning from each other. Thank you for that lovely introduction, Doctor. I really appreciate it. Here's what we'd like to do. The 3 Mondays, today and the next 2 weeks, really have emerged out of our work in Jewish Sacred Aging. And again, the website is jewishsacredaging.com. And if you'd like to look at it, and if you'd like to write for the website, by the way, we have people writing for the website on a variety of issues from all over the country, actually all over the world. And I'll also give a plug to our weekly podcast called Seekers of Meaning that posts a new one every Friday. The one that's up right now is a very fascinating interview with a gentleman who runs a podcast on bereavement based in Israel, Michael Lieben. What I like to do with you in these 3 weeks is explore with you some of the approaches that we have as a Jewish tradition have to our own life. One of the most fantastic things that we can explore as Jews is the power and the prescience and the passion of our own texts and how they relate to the lives that we are living right now. You are correct in the introduction that we're going to do some texts, and a lot of this is really based on practicality. And I'm going to ask you to just think about your own life, the life of your families, the life of your loved ones, where you are in that life. And we're going to try to explore how a variety of Jewish textual approaches this week on a more theological perspective, next week to explore the approach to health and wellness, both physical health and mental health, which are extremely important right now, especially as we get older, when issues of health, especially post-pandemic, if we ever get out of the pandemic, have become so important to many of us. And the last week, we're going to explore one of the two of the things that have gotten us into most trouble in my program, and that is this explosion of new rituals. And we're going to take a look at rituals from everything from signing an advance directive to removal of the wedding ring after a year of mourning, to older adult cohabitation without marriage. I'm sure that does not happen in Arizona, but I live in New Jersey, so there are basically no rules. And the one that's gotten us a little bit of a controversy, and that is redefining adultery in light of Alzheimer's and dementia. But that's for 2 weeks from now. That's the tease. But I want to start at the beginning, because everything we do at Jewish Sacred Aging does in many ways find itself based upon how we approach text. First of all, some just statistical analysis drawn from a variety of resources and studies that have been emerging, really in essence from the first major recent population studies in 2000, 2001, up to the Pew study of the American Jewish community of a couple of years ago that was published just at the birth of the pandemic. That study, believe it or not, indicated that between 46 and 49% of the contemporary American Jewish community, which identified in the Pew study of close to 7 million people, between 46 and 49% are people over the age of 50. That's almost half of our population are people over the age of 50. That means that we're experiencing such a radical shift in the way we function as a community, yet the majority of our community has yet to deal with this in a substantive way. We know that the governmental statistics about aging, the 10,000 people turn 65 every 10 seconds in this country. The tipping point, and there's a whole series. I've just finished a new book called Aftermath, which is talking about the baby boom generation as we begin to age out, and the implications of that economically, politically, spiritually, sociologically. It's a it's a dense book. But what this population study and what our demographics are showing us, we are an aging community and we are below replication level, which is something else that we rarely talk about. So we want to explore with you how we can use our tradition, how we can use Jewish tradition to give us a spiritual foundation to take a look at this unbelievable third stage of life. That we have been given the gift of longevity, God willing, and what do we do with it? And that leads us leads me to introduce you to what I'm going to suggest to you for all these conversations is the spiritual question. The spiritual question. And that has to do with time. We can control a lot of things in our life, but you can sit in synagogue if you're a member of a synagogue 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and pray every prayer known to us. Never eat a cheeseburger, or if you're from Philly, a cheesesteak. And the one thing that no matter how hard you try, that you cannot control, none of us can control, is time. Time. Every single one of us in this class probably knows someone who thought they had more time. And so the spiritual question that I'm going to ask you to consider for our time together is this: what do we do with the time we have left, knowing that we cannot control the time we have left? That's the spiritual question. And I'm going to suggest to you that that is a question that emerges in our psyches and souls as we get older. We sometimes never really identify it. We sometimes repress it, but it's there, especially in those quiet moments of existence when we allow the deflector shields of daily life to fall down and we begin to think about our own place in that, our own place in existence. And so we turn to text. So I'm going to try and share a screen with you. And if you would just say a small prayer to the technology gods, which are next to the baseball gods, very fickle. And here we go. That worked. I'm very happy. So they're going to be, these are 6 texts, which I'm going to suggest to you. There's a theory. It's a theory of mine that can form like a theological foundation for our life. And if you want to think about it in a schematic way, think of the 6 points of a Magen David, of a Star of David. The first text is Genesis 2:18. This is a fantastic text. And it comes from the second story of creation. We have 2 stories, Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. And in Genesis 2, as opposed to the first story of creation, man and woman are not created together. Man is created first. Adam is created first, and he's wandering around the garden. And God, in this wonderful mythology of the garden, says, you know, it's really not good that you're alone. It's really not good that you're alone. And they, of course, you know the story. Eventually, Eve is created. But I want to focus on the word, the Hebrew word livado. This is a fantastic word. It's a high holiday word. And you're not getting a high holiday sermon, don't worry. Livado means, in essence, in the English translation, alone. But I'm going to suggest to you it means something even more powerful than that. And we're going to see this word again in another text. This is really the existential aloneness, I think, that we begin to understand as we get older. For those of you who are mental health professionals, Irving Yalom's, the father of group therapy, wrote this fantastic book called Staring at the Sun. And in that, he talks about death anxiety, which is really another way of approaching the existential aloneness that really encapsulates many of us. This leads to what I'm going to suggest to you is my part of my personal theology, the theology of relationships. By this, I mean is as we get older, the most important thing that we have is the relationships that we have with other people. I'm not talking about health, etc. This is paramount. But this is our relationship basis with other human beings. We see this, by the way, in the pandemic with the isolation, the upsurge of isolation and loneliness that has occurred, which has led to a whole increase of suicide. But that's another story for next week. When we're 25, 35, 40, our circle of relationships is usually pretty wide, pretty big. But what happens as we get a little older? Those circle of relationships begin to get a little smaller. I speak from my own personal experience. I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, may have had a similar understanding. It's difficult. It's a challenge. Those relationships change. And some of the people who you held dear, very dear, that helped give your life definition and texture are no longer here. And as opposed to when we're younger, a lot of these relationships that are no longer with us now, they're not replicated and they aren't replaced. So the power of human relationships, the power of being with other people, the power of being engaged with society, every piece of literature validates this from every particular perspective. This is a human condition. We are made to be in relationship with other people. To channel a little Abraham Joshua Heschel in one of his books or two of his books, I think God in Search of Man or Man in Search of God, when he maintains that we are creatures in search of meaning, we need to be needed. We have that need. We need to be needed and we need to need. In essence, it's love. In essence, it's a sense, and we'll see this in some of the ritual things. In essence, it's a sense that at this stage of our life, we understand the power of being with other people. And again, parenthetically, within the pandemic, this has become really important as so many people were cut off, isolated from other people. So this first text I want to introduce to you is this understanding of the power of being in relationship, the idea of what I call the theology of relationships. And the text is this Genesis 2:18 from the concept of being livado, alone. That leads to this second text, which I in my opinion, is the number one chapter in the Torah. This is Genesis chapter 3. And it follows directly from the concept of livado. Genesis 3 asks the first question in the Torah. God's first question, Ayeka, where are you? And it really has nothing to do with, I'm on the East Coast, you guys are in Arizona. It has everything to do with where you are existentially, spiritually, emotionally. This is some of the power of text. Where are you? Where are you? This chapter 3, this is the mythology of Adam, of the Garden of Eden. You all know the story, and it's based upon Sumerian. I'm sure you may have had a class in this pre-Hebraic text. But Genesis 3, the power of Genesis 3 is that it introduces the concept of finite factuality, code language for the understanding that we will die. And herein, I'm going to suggest to you lies the whole ballgame. The whole ballgame. By the whole ballgame, I mean, we understand, and this is biblical authors' attempt to deal with this, that we are mortal. That we are mortal. And most of us, and this was explained to me by a professor once, visually like this. This represents the reality of that we want to live. We want to live. This represents the reality in Genesis 3 that at one point we will not. And when these two things come together, when the desire for us to live meets in some psychological, psychic, deep spiritual, psycho-spiritual moment in our life, meets the reality that we will not, that we are finite and that we are mortal. The result of that, I'm going to suggest to you, is religion. Is religion. So if you're saying to yourself, are you saying that man created God and mankind created all this religious stuff to explain away the fear of our own death? My answer to you is yes. My answer to you is yes. We created cultures, and I'm sure you've done, some of you, of the other cultural studies, as the introduction mentioned. We created religions and gods and superstitions and beliefs and afterlives in some way to try and explain this moment when we realize that at one point in time, which we cannot control, we will cease to exist. And this is a very, very frightening reality. And a lot of people just don't want to deal with it. They repress it. But Genesis 3, that's why the Torah is such a profoundly wonderful thing to study, raises this issue right at the beginning. And raises and asks what I'm going to call the 3 why questions of existence. These are the only questions that really matter. There are 3 questions. Why was I born? Why must I die? Why am I here? Why was I born? Why must I die? Why am I here? I'm going to suggest to you that these are the 3 questions that matter. And we had no control over it. Are we some cosmic accident? Or do each one of us have a reason to be alive on this planet at this moment of time? What is the meaning and the purpose of my existence? That's what Genesis 3 really is asking. You know, there was a book from, at least when I was a kid, I can't see any of you, so I really don't know. But when I was a kid, many years ago, in a galaxy very, very far away, there's a 60s book, I think, by Chaim Potok called The Chosen. It was a good book and a very movie. But in the book, the son, whose name was Reuben, I think, asked his father just about the meaning of existence, you know? And the father, a scholar, turns around to his son and says, we are here for what amounts to, in the great cosmic cosmos, of a blink of an eye. That's all we're here for, a blink of an eye. But it is not the blink of an eye that matters, says the father. It is the eye that blinks. Meaning, we are given this gift of life. What are you going to do with it? That's that spiritual question of time. You're given the gift of life. What are you going to do with it? It's the eye that blinks. And this raises all kinds of questions that are profoundly covered in our tradition. The concept of memory, the concept of mitzvah. It's the why questions, because each of us are creatures, as Heschel says, creatures in search of meaning. We want to mean something. We want to count for something. We want to have a purpose in this very brief blink of an eye. And that, I'm going to suggest to you, really is the heart and soul of our tradition, and the heart and soul of this text in Genesis chapter 3. This is why it's a very, very profound text. It's a beautiful text. It's a beautiful little story. But really, when you peel back the layers, it raises the fundamental questions of why. Why was I born? Why must I die? And why am I here? And I know I can't control the time as much as I want. And I can't do this alone. I need to be with, because I seek meaning with other human beings. Remember, Judaism is not an ascetic civilization. We understand that life is, to channel an old textbook from seminary days, that life is with people. And that's how we also begin to find our definition. And in the mental health things, which we'll get to next week, this right now is a very, very serious issue about the mental health component of isolation and loneliness, epidemic. By the way, I don't want to break the rule, but if there's a question that comes up in the middle of this, I guess you have to put it in the Q&A, and I have no problem being interrupted. And if we can answer it right away, if not, and if we're going to get to it in a couple seconds, I'll just say, hold on to that. We're going to get to it. So the first two texts set the stage here. Livado, it is not good for me to be alone, that we live in relationships. And Ayeka, where am I? Where are you? This idea of the confrontation of the understanding of our own mortality, of our own finite factuality, and the resulting why questions of existence. The third text is from Genesis 12. This is another great text. Great text. This is, for those of you who remember the Torah portions, this is Lech Lecha. This is the beginning of the story of the Jewish people, because the first 11 chapters in Torah are prehistory. The biblical author is trying to figure out how we got there. But then Genesis 12 begins the actual story of the Jewish people with Avram. He's not yet Abraham, he's Avram. Genesis 12 begins with the Hebrew, Lech Lecha me'artzecha, go forth into to a land which I will show you. This has particular impact, I think, to people as we get older. There is a certain hesitancy to understand that there's tomorrow. That we and you may know people who want to do something, always wanted to choose something. They may be retired or semi-retired or doing something else, but they feel constrained in some way, either by phrases such as, well, I'm too old to do this, or I'd always wanted to do that, but I can't do that. I have too many obligations. Here's the Jewish text, which says, do not be afraid to take a risk. Do not be afraid to go into the future. Do not be afraid to have faith in yourself and faith in the future. There's a whole variety of interpretations of this text. One of them being Lech Lecha, the Hebrew, and I make no pretense of being a Hebrew scholar by any stretch of the imagination. But the Lech means to go forth, and Lecha is sometimes translated as go forth, you go forth into the future, but it also means psychologically, Lecha, into yourself. We're at a stage in our lives where many people, and I'll be honest with you, me included, spend some significant time now going into ourselves and evaluating and taking stock. The cheshbon hanefesh that we do around the high holidays, the evaluation of our own soul. What does it mean? Where are we, Ayeka? Where are we in our life? Some people live in the land of regret. It's a tough land to live in. And it's not a land that our tradition says you should live in. Rather, our tradition basically says you're going into the future. You have no choice, by the way. You're going in, God willing, there's a tomorrow. There's this wonderful image that if you remember the first letter in the Torah, if you look up here on the PowerPoint, is a bet. It goes like this, okay? The bet is closed at the top, closed in the back, closed at the bottom, but open to the future, because that's where we're all going. We have no choice. So when Genesis 12 says, Lech Lecha me'artzecha, it's also basically saying you're going into tomorrow. What do you want to do with it? What do you want to do with it? This is the faith in yourself, which is tough. As we get a little older, sometimes health issues, family issues, caregiving issues. The most requested workshop that we do in our program is called The Art of Caregiving, because it is a new life stage and it can overwhelm an individual for not years, but sometimes decades, as we'll talk a little bit about in 2 weeks. So this idea of going into the future, there's another modern interpretation. When you get into your car later on today, you'll notice that the windshield is larger than the rearview mirror. Why, say some modern commentators? Because we're not going backward. You're going into tomorrow. You can learn from where you've been in order to go into the future. It's a really great image, by the way. This idea of not being afraid to try something new. There's a whole bunch of research now, by the way, on dementia and Alzheimer's that basically says one of the ways to keep your brain active, and this is the non-genetic interpretation, obviously, is to keep learning something new, that you not only can you teach an old dog new tricks, but in many ways, the brain remains very, very elastic and accepting to creating new neurons and pathways in the brain. So if you say, I've always wanted to learn that foreign language, I've always wanted to take up that musical, do it. Don't be afraid to just do it on your own terms, at your own pace, but do it. That's lechacha. Go forth. Go forth. Have faith in yourself. Have faith in the future. Look, Judaism is telling you, it's just amazing, this the brilliance of our tradition, that it basically says, take the risk. You're living, you're alive once. This is the gift. This is the gift. Don't just put it on a shelf at a certain age. You know, we are in many ways have three ages. There's a chronological age, there's a biological age, and what I call the spiritual age. So for example, my chronological age, according to the calendar, is I'm 78. My biological age depends upon the day and how much exercise I've done in the morning, because there's some days that I get up and my body feels like it's, well, you're 78, and there's other days that my body feels like, yeah, you know, I feel pretty good today. I don't really feel my legs are working. In my spiritual age, that'd be a very interesting conversation if we were able to go around the class. And right now, I feel like I'm about 42. Now, my body says you're not, okay? And the calendar says you're not. But those are the three ages I'd suggest to you, chronological, biological, and spiritual. And to play with that, because they all have something to do with how we move into the future. And here again, is Judaism gives us, here's a religious civilization that says, take a risk, go for it. Go for it. You're going to see in one of the rituals that we do, the Simchat Chochmah ritual in 2 weeks, there's a prayer I'm going to share with you that actually says this. It's a magnificent prayer. One of the other things I wanted to share with you about Genesis 12, because it raises one of the tensions that I think all of us as we get a little older have to deal with. And that's the tension, as you can see on the screen, of holding on and letting go. I'm fascinated, and I love some of your opinions on this. I'm fascinated by the tension, this tension that we live in. And we live with this tension all of our life. But I think it becomes more profound as we get a little older. What do we need to hold on to in order to move forward in our life? And what at this stage of our lives do we just need to let go of? I can't deal with this anymore. If I continue to hold on to some of these emotions and feelings, perhaps it's a relationship. You know, parenthetically, and we did a podcast on this about a year ago with a woman who wrote this book called Gray Divorce. But one of the things we've learned is that the population segment of American population that is getting divorced more than any other are baby boomers. The so-called gray divorce. Sometimes we need to let go of a relationship in order to be healthy. Sometimes we need to let go of a feeling. Sometimes an estrangement binds us, like the Akedah, in such a way that we can't move forward. And what the text is saying is, you know, to be healthy, sometimes you just have to let go of. You have to let go of some of this stuff. You just have to let go. And this tension, I think, is very, very real. What do we need to hold on to? And what do we need to let go of? And that, you see, requires that part of the beginning of the Torah portion, faith in yourself, that no matter what tomorrow brings, you're going to be able to handle it. There's this wonderful image, again, a wonderful image that I'll share with you that I think speaks to exactly what Genesis 12 is talking about. This is an image from a poem called Holding On and Letting Go, from the late Dr. Rabbi Harold Schulweis, who was the rabbi of Valley Beth Shalom, a very, very prominent conservative shul on Ventura Boulevard in Encino, California, for those of you who know LA. And and it comes from a book that Rabbi Schulweis did called In God's Mirror. And it has an image of the trapeze artist. Right? Remember for those of you who remember circuses, there are no more circuses anymore. But if you remember the circus or the trapeze artist, or if you remember Ed Sullivan on Sunday night at 8 o'clock, he would have these acts, sometimes circus acts, with the guy with the spinning plate. Some of you may not remember this, or Senor Wences, who put lipstick on his thumb and whatever. And as a kid, I could never understand any of this. But also he would have sometimes the trapeze artists, and the trapeze artists would go back and forth and back and forth. And at one point, as he backed and went forth, he let go and had the faith that other bar would be coming towards them so that they could grab onto it. In many ways, that's exactly what Genesis 12 is talking about. That's the tension. Sometimes we have to let go. Sometimes we have to let go of things that are holding us back or impeding us physically, emotionally, spiritually, economically, so that we can move forward and live. And that letting go is scary. It's very, very scary. And it requires a certain amount of faith. And I would imagine that some of you know people who can't let go. They just can't, for a whole variety of reasons. Some of them very legitimate. But that letting go and having faith in oneself, that's a challenge. That's a challenge. And it's a tipping point in many cases as we get older. Some people continue to flourish, continue to live, continue to have faith in the future. And some people just get to a point in their life when they say, I like to, but I just can't. And why that happens, that's another story for another time. So these first three texts, that set this stage, the Livado, Ayeka, and Lechacha. It's not good to be alone. The introduction of finite factuality and the question of where am I, and the three why questions: why was I born? Why must I die? Why am I here? And moving into the future, which we all will, hopefully, and the faith in ourselves and the faith in the future, and the tradition saying, take the risk. Don't be afraid to let go of that which inhibits your own humanity and progress and growth as a human being. The next three, Genesis 32. This is a great text. The context of this text is the reunion of Jacob and Esau, and talk about estrangement. Remember, the book of Genesis, for those of you who are mental health professionals, if there are any in the class, the book of Genesis really can be looked at as a book of transgenerational pathology, because each generation carries forward with it the transmission of a certain type of generational pathologies and that are being replicated in families today. So Jacob and Esau were estranged. Jacob, if you remember, Jacob sold the birthright and fled to the old country, and Rebecca, his mom, said, get out of town because Esau, you stole Esau's birthright. He really doesn't like you, and he's going to come and get you eventually. And it's 20 years later, and Jacob is on his way back to Canaan, and he's got wives and a whole entourage, and he sends the scouts come back and say, listen, your estranged brother Esau is coming to meet you, and he has his entourage as well. And he's going to kill you. He's angry. You stole his, this has been jummeling in himself for a generation. And the scene, this is if you were a dramatist, it's beautifully set stage. Jacob sends his entourage away. And he goes to the river Jabbok. And he is livado, he is alone. He is existentially alone. And he wrestles with something, an angel, or in some of the psychological commentaries, Naomi Rosenblatt's magnificent psychological commentary on the book of Genesis, wrestles with himself, as all of us do. All of us do at night. The motif here is, you can stage this, empty stage, spotlight. Jacob is alone. The river is beside him, and he wrestles. By the way, it's water. And one of the motifs in the Torah, as well as everything else, is when there's a water image, it's usually a sign of transition from the Bible times to modern American cinema. Think of From Here to Eternity. Jacob wrestles. And what is the result? What is the result of his wrestling? His name is changed. His name is changed. He, in essence, gets a new identity. He wrestles with himself. Part of that holding on and letting go for many people at this stage of our lives is a wrestling with that question, Ayeka, where am I? Where am I at this stage of my life? What do I want? What do I need? What do I need to hold on to give myself and my soul life? I wrestle. And just like Jacob, a lot of times we emerge from that with a new sense of who I am, in essence, a new identity. We change our identities throughout our life. Not only names, but how we call ourselves, how people call us. We change, but this is an existential change. And it's fantastic. Jacob becomes Israel. And the reconciliation takes place because he meets Esau and they have this wonderful, wonderful reconciliation. They basically agree they're never going to be friends, but they agree that they can't change what was, and to be hostile and estranged serves no purpose. They've both been blessed. So in essence, they agree to continue with their lives. They rarely come in contact with each other. They don't invite each other over for dinner. They don't take family trips together. But in essence, they understand what was. We cannot, like that bet, live in the past. Every single clergy person, and I bet you some of you too, has had the experience with a congregant or even in their own families of types of estrangement, brother and brother, sister and sister, et cetera, God forbid, parents and children. And that the hurt that is carried with people, it interferes with their ability to enjoy life. And it has to go someplace. That's why that holding on and letting go is so powerful. This attempt to put away the estrangements, because life is, remember, as Potok reminded us, we're here for a blink of an eye. As we get older, some people may have this expression, people that stuff that bothered them before, and life is too short to worry about. And it's true. Life is too short to get bogged down in the muck and the mire of estrangements and ill will. There comes a time when you have to just let some of this go in order to live and to be healthy emotionally, spiritually, and physically. Because if you constantly repress these feelings, the feelings go somewhere. and that's usually disease. What this text also teaches us, as Genesis 12 in its own way does, is that change is constant and change is a new normal. By the way, we're going to see this at the ASU conference on Sunday on artificial intelligence and the attempts of the Jewish community to come to grips with how we're going to be deal with this newness. Change is constant. Our bodies are changing right now as we speak. The internal mechanisms of our body, cells are dying and being replaced. There's this wonderful, it's on PBS. I saw it last month. It was a 3-part program sponsored by the Templeton Foundation on searching. I think it's called Searching. It's done by a physicist who's actually a member of Temple Israel in Memphis, Tennessee, Lightman, I think his name is. But he talks about physics and the universe and the fact of the expansion of the universe and this idea of change, and that we are part as human beings, not separate from the universe, but part of the universe. And as such, in many ways, channeling that Potok text, in many ways, we are part of this organic change, that the universe is expanding. The change is constant. None of us are the same person that we were 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 30 years ago. God hope. We've changed. And so this idea embedded, I think, in Genesis 32, that no matter how old we are chronologically, Judaism says you are never too old to learn, to adapt, to grow, to be, to try, to risk, to let go of that which holds you, and to grab onto that new bar and that cosmic trapeze. What a gift. It's a tremendous gift that our tradition gives us. You're never, ever, ever too old to do the new, to grow. That's who we are. That's who we are. We're part of nature. And as such, we're constantly evolving and constantly changing. Which leads me to the next to the last text, Exodus 3. This is another, we don't teach this enough to people. And that's our fault. And that's our relationship with what we call God. The freedom to have that relationship and to have that relationship evolve. What God do you believe in at this stage of life? That's really, really important. You know, the context of Exodus 3 is the burning bush. Moses on the mountain, he's tending flocks, which was a big deal back then. And the bush talks to him and says, you know, I've seen what's going on with my people. Go to Pharaoh and say, let my people go. And Moses, being, you know, smart kid, says, you know, I appreciate, you know, the voice coming out of the bush. But if I go to Pharaoh and say, look, I'm here because I heard a voice in a burning bush, I don't think I'm going to get very far. Could you give me a name? Could you just give me a name? What's your name? I can say, you know, Joe told me to come. God's answer in Exodus is the Hebrew, Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. In the old translations, that is, I am that I am, but it's not the essence of the Hebrew, and this is why this is so important for us. The essence of the Hebrew is, it's almost untranslatable. But in some of the newer translations, A, they don't translate it, or B, they come and I shall be what I shall be. What does that mean for us? Many Jewish people walk off the bima as a result of a bar or bat mitzvah, and they have a nice 13-year-old concept of God. And they get to be our age, and life has dealt with them certain cards, and they reach into their pocket to say they need something spiritually to bring comfort or answers, and they come up with a 13-year-old definition of God, and they reject it as it's not there. It doesn't mean anything. I need to know why these things are happening to me, to my friends. What Exodus 3 gives us, and this is a tremendous gift of the Jewish tradition, constantly you are given permission to reevaluate what that word God means. And there is no one right answer. The one basic fundamental is concept of unity, of echadness, of oneness. But how do you understand that oneness? Is it a supernatural being, creator, listener, intervener? It is a more naturalistic a feeling. We just did a podcast with two of my colleagues who wrote a book on natural theology that called The God We Can Believe In, which rejects all the supernatural belief structures of traditional Judaism and replaces it with a more natural theology. Is it a sense of life force in the universe? Is that your God? Is this concept of mystery? There's something there. I just don't know what it is, but I'm content to understand that it is a level of reality which I may not be able to understand at this stage of my life. But Judaism gives us the permission to constantly reevaluate and challenge our sense of what that word God means to us at this stage of our life, because it changes, and it very well may change as we move from each stage of life. The God of our 20s may not be the God of our 80s, because we're very, very different people. We've wrestled, we've changed, we've grown. We're not that same person. We've looked to channel that magnificent song of my youth. Some of your youth, maybe. I think it's the Joni Mitchell song, Both Sides Now. We've looked at life from both sides now. And perhaps our definition of the sacred also changes. And here's a text in our tradition that gives us the permission to do that. There's this, I think Gordis' book, God Was Not in the Fire. And he writes in the beginning of about the first third of the book, this idea of the difference between, let's say, Judaism and other religious traditions. And he says, in some religious traditions, the belief structure is believe and you will be saved. Believe and you will be saved. There's a direct correlation. It says in Judaism, regardless of the denominational structure, the belief is search and you will find meaning. And the search is ongoing. That's what Exodus 3 is all about. The search is on. It's ongoing. From the moment we are born until we take that last most precious breath, the search is ongoing. Search and you will find meaning. That's why relationships, to go back, are so valuable and important. Because part of our searching we do in community. That's why community in Judaism is so fundamental. That's why you need a community to pray. Because we understand fundamentally we're in relationship with other people, as well as the sacred, as we know from the first creation stories. What is the God that you believe in right now? What is your concept? We do a very, very bad job in synagogue land in talking about theology. And that's a mistake. That's a mistake. Because each one of us are spiritual beings. That's why those three why questions of Genesis 3 are so fundamentally important. So Exodus 3 gives us this permission to constantly reevaluate our relationship with the sacred and what we call the sacred or God or the eternal. And finally, my second favorite text, Deuteronomy 30:19. This fantastic text. We meet this text. It's in Deuteronomy. We usually read it in the Torah in August, when most of the people where I live in Jersey are down ashore, and perhaps miss that Shabbat. So we bring it back on Yom Kippur afternoon or morning, depending upon your shul. Deuteronomy 30 is the parasha called Nitzavim. You're standing this day, all of you, your heads, your chiefs, your hierarchy, all of you are standing this day. And you're going to be given choices. In life, there's going to be good and not so good. There's going to be blessings. There are going to be curses. There's life and there's death. Our tradition says in 19, Uvecharta Chaim. Look, you're going to have to make choices every single day. We suggest Uvecharta Chaim. Make choices in your life that sanctify life. That sanctify life. What does that mean? It means the B part of the verse, which we rarely teach you. The B part of that verse basically says, why should you make choices that sanctify life? So that the people who come after us will be blessed as well. Oh. So in other words, we're not alone. We are never alone. If you remember the 60s when, what I can make my own mind up, what I do doesn't then impact anybody else. No. Time out. The tradition says, don't be silly. What you do does impact other people. The choices you make do have a result and an effect on other human beings, whether you know it or not. Your life counts for something. You are not livado alone. We make choices that sanctify life. And this goes to the concept of legacy. Why right now are so many people of the baby boomer generation all of a sudden concerned more and more with that B part of the verse? What do I want to leave behind? And we're not talking about the material things. I'm going to suggest to you that there comes a point in everyone's life when we understand that we don't need more stuff. We don't need more stuff. And I'm not talking about the downsizing from the 4-bedroom house to the condominium. We don't need more stuff. What we really need to collect are the spiritual moments, the memories. And they ask the question, what of me do I want the people who I care about to take into the future because I can't go to the future? Parenthesis. One of the great challenges right now is this growing subgroup in Jewish older adults of solo agers who have no children, who have no family, and they face these very, very existential questions alone. It has a lot to do with the caregiving issue. Who's going to take care of them without a care network? So this is a very, very important subject right now in our community that the majority of the community is still yet to really grapple with. But this idea of legacy is very, very important. Some of you on this call may be members of the Great Grandparent Club. It's a great club. One I fully endorse, having an independent poll taken in southern New Jersey, where I live, the 2 greatest grandchildren known to the human race. It was a very small poll, in case you're asking, but I believe in it. And in looking at these kids a couple of years ago, this moment occurred to me that no matter how hard I try, no matter how much I pray, no matter how good I may be or not, I cannot go where these grandchildren are going. I can't, and I want to desperately, but I can't. I can't. It's Genesis 3. So I begin to say, what of me do I want them to take with them? And I'm not talking about the material things. Sadly, a lot of us have been to funerals. In my 50 and a half years as a rabbi, I've been to a bunch of them. Only one in all my years as a rabbi, only one, when I was a rookie rabbi in California, was the funeral about materialism. Every other funeral, especially now when the restructuring of funerals, when you have a lot more people speaking, especially children and grandchildren, it's all about the memory. It's all about the trip that we took. It's all about grandpop's hugs. It's all about the smell when you walked into Bubby's house on Passover or Rosh Hashanah. It's all about those shared experiences. Nothing to do with the car or the condo or the this or the that. But it's the spiritual things, the legacy that really now begins to impact us, especially as we get older. That's one of the beauties of 3019. It's about choice. It's about choice. What are the choices that we make? Because the choices that we make define who we are. They've always done that. They've always done that. And so this idea translates itself to what I call this concept of randomness, that we can control certain things in life, but there's a lot of it we can't control. And so the address theory of self is this formula that I want to end with. Goes like this. If you look up here on the board, on the PowerPoint, GC plus FO plus R equals S. S stands for self, who we are. In other words, we, each one of us, I believe, and it's my theory, you feel free to reject it, but it works for me. We are made up in our choices of how we choose from the following things. GC stands for genetic code. Like it or not, we do carry the genetic codes of our parents. I want to be a certain height and weight and this, that, and the other thing. But if you knew my mom and dad, you knew that, kind of I'm going to look a little bit like this. FO stands for family of origin. That's all the stuff that's put into us from the time we're in the womb to the time we're, on those all first 5 formative years and more so. And more so. Those are these tapes, the voices. Some people spend thousands of dollars trying to get rid of these voices. They never leave. The best we can hope for is in therapy to understand how to listen in a new way and what to do with these voices. And the R stands for randomness. So this is the stuff that we can't control. We can't control our genetics. We certainly couldn't control the family that we were born into. They didn't go to you right after fertilization and somebody says in an old Woody Allen movie, look, okay, the egg is fertilized. Take a look out there. That's your parents. What do you think? And you didn't get a vote. Okay. The R stands for randomness. And this is what I think is where we can exercise some control. This is the randomness of existence, which is good and bad. It's the randomness right now of somebody at the supermarket who's given up ever finding love or relationships and bumps into somebody at the frozen food counter, and that magic connection happens and their life changes. Randomness. Who caught? It's the phone call that somebody you probably will know is going to get a call today that the interview went great. We want to offer you that job. You're going to have to move. How are you do you choose? It's that phone call that some people may get this afternoon or tonight from the nurse at the doctor's office saying, your tests are back. You need to see the doctor right away. It's that God forbid accident when somebody who's had too many drinks crosses that yellow line. And in an instant, life changes. How we choose to deal with the randomness of existence determines in many ways who we are. And this choice becomes even more powerful as we get older. And the tradition says, when you make these choices, make the choices that sanctify life, even as life ends. And this is not the workshop, but this comes into it. Because with the whole bioethics text of Judaism understands that sometimes you're going to have to make a choice. And sometimes those choices are between bad and badder, as we say in Jersey. But it have to make a choice. Family of origin, genetic code, randomness. And how we choose determines who we are. And these choices become more profound, much more profound as we get older. And the tradition reminds us, make choices that sanctify life, even at the end of life. So in summary, you have these texts, which I present to you as a sort of like a spiritual foundation for our own third stage of life. We don't want to be alone. The understanding that we are mortal. And we ask that questions from Ayeka, those three questions of existence from Genesis 3. The idea of moving forward in life, going into the future, having the faith in the future, holding on to that which gives us power and pleasure and meaning, and letting go with everything that doesn't, that holds us back and restricts us. The freedom to wrestle with who we are, to change our identity, and the understanding that change is normal. It's part of who we are. Even in our, as we discuss and evaluate our relationship with the sacred, and given the permission to change what that definition and how we relate to it is. And in the end, having to make choices that sanctify life, no matter where we are, in what stage, especially as we get older. The power and the passion and the gift of living in this blink of an eye. So we have time, I guess. Thank you for putting up with this and being patient. And I don't know if there are any questions or comments or suggestions, but let me shop the.
Yeah, let's turn the, yeah, great. Thank you. This was fabulous. Absolutely marvelous. I'm so grateful to you to bringing these insights and sharing them with us. I'm going to pose a question to begin, and then people probably will put some more questions in the Q&A. You are probably familiar with the term transhumanism, right? You are one of the people who may know that term. That's a movement that actually is thinking about the development of a kind of a superhuman being, primarily because of technology and scientific advances. One of the goals of transhumanism is, as they put it, crusades on death, or crusades against death. So how would you, from the Jewish perspective, would respond to those technologically optimistic people who think that technology will provide what they call radical life extension? Yeah. I'm interested in it because I've written extensively on it, but I would like to hear you reflect on it.
You know, this is all part of the anti-aging movement, if I'm not mistaken. A lot of it is out west. I think perhaps on the East Coast we're a little bit more cynical. I don't know, but and I remember when I was starting out as my first 6 years out of the seminary on the West Coast, I remember bumping into this a lot. And this was in the 70s. So when we,
that's true. It started in Los Angeles. Certain elements of the movement started.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I think I bumped into some of the people who were, and this is at the beginning of this in 1973, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
That's right.
In LA. Look, I'm going to go back, you know, to the Genesis 3. Okay. We're mortal. We're all going to die. There's a whole life extension, you know, as you're talking about science. I bumped into, there's a guy whose name just went right out of my mind, who actually, when I ran my department, he spoke for us at one of our annual meetings. And I went to
Kurzweil, maybe, right? Kurzweil?
No. He's a physician doing this life extension research in New York City, and he was the first guy. This is a long time ago, who talked to me about telomeres or telomores, however you pronounce it.
Telomeres,
and he was playing around with these things and saying, well, if we can restructure the telomere, we can do life extension, and all sounds wonderful. It really does sound wonderful. But the question that keeps coming back when you talk about this with, you know, people in synagogue land, or say, well, if I can live to 110 as I was when I was 35, I'm in for that. Sign me up. But if I'm going to be 110 and be frail and live like my mom in the last 2 years of her life, I don't want any parts of it, because that's not quality of life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Do I think that the lifespan of the average human being can be extended? I do. This book I refer to, that's in the other room, that I just finished yesterday, on basically the waning years of the baby boom generation. talks a little bit about that. And in the file that I have at home, I don't have it here, there's a whole file that thick on some of these issues. I think our lifespan, and tragically, because of the pandemic, in the United States, the lifespan has shortened in the last 3 years. It actually dropped. But I have utmost faith that 10 years from now, we'll start to climb back up. How far? I don't know. I'm not that smart. Do I believe that we will make progress? Absolutely. Would I be in favor of it? I'm in favor in theory, but I also know that we're all going to die. We're all. And so if we can expand what some people are calling the health span as opposed to the lifespan. I read this somewhere, I forget where I read it, but it's a phrase that I really, really like. In other words, to stay healthy as long as we'll talk about this next week in the health and wellness, and why Judaism is such a powerful message about health, both physical and mental health. But extend the health span as opposed to the lifespan. Then, and I have utmost confidence given technology, because the technology, as you'll talk about on Sunday at the conference, is a generation ahead of where society is. But there's a lot of fear in this. I mean, there is going to be a lot of pushback. But in the end, if you can guarantee me health and a healthier lifestyle, I'm all in.
Okay, I'm a little bit more critical maybe than you are, less optimistic, but I agree with you that we do need to look to the tradition, because the Jewish tradition, I think, is so wise about those questions. I believe that we have 2 comments on the Q&A, so let's if you can look at them and respond, and then we have 2 comments in the chat. So let's start with the Q&A from Susan Diamond. Do you see that question? 2 questions.
Yeah, yes. Susan, do you just, I can't see you, Susan. This is, do you just put on the International Center for Longevity?
She cannot talk, but you cannot hear her responding to you. Yeah, I think that she put also comments in the chat.
Okay. Oh, the Butler, right. I have his book at home too. I'm not sure what you mean by, do you mean the aging movement? I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. And so far as the timing, it was noon your time, 2 o'clock Eastern time. For today and the next 2 weeks. That's the time frame. Yes, we're on time. So Susan, when you say, do you mean the aging movement? There's a bunch of aging movements that we were just talking about. Forget that question. Okay. This is, I'm moving between the Q&A and the chat here.
And the chat, yeah, it's a bit challenging.
Okay.
Let's see if do we have anything else in the. Okay. So yes, the 2 points that you put in the Q&A were one about timing and one about the name of the movement. But I think we are good. Let's see if there are other questions on how to it's really about how to navigate, as you called it in the title of your lecture series, how to navigate those challenges, because the challenges are always going to be with us, and as you say, we have no control. So here is kind of the tension, I think, between awareness of the limits of our abilities on the one hand, and the faith in our ability, which what technology is all about. Technology is all about faith in our powers to solve whatever it is. Right. But the wisdom that you shared with us is recognizing that no, there is a limit to everything, and not just to the lifespan, but also to what we can and cannot do about the aging issues that are going to come up. So how do we balance these limitations of power and the belief that we have the power? I think that's kind of the tricky part.
Yeah, I think we do have the power, and I'm a big fan of technology. In fact, if I was writing a prayer book, and there's absolutely no chance of that ever happening, one of the first prayers in that prayer book would be a prayer giving thanks for technology, because the medical technology has made it possible for many of the people who are hanging out here to still be alive. And then there are people playing golf right now in Scottsdale who, if it wasn't for medical technology, would have died. And every one of us here know some of those people. So technology and its proper, I'll tell you exactly, Susan, you have to send me your email, because I like to touch base with you, because this is bizarre. It's talking to the screen. Let me know where you're located, because I'm outside of Philly, in southern New Jersey. But the technology, it's neutral. I believe the technology is neutral. It's Deuteronomy 30:19. It's what we choose to do with technology that determines the blessing or the curse. I really believe that. And so, and we're given the power, Psalm 8, I think, the power and the dominion to expand, to explore, continue to explore. I'm a full believer in that. I believe in that. We take technology for granted, but it's how we manage that technology. It's really, I think, one of the great challenges of the future. So to jump ahead to Sunday, this whole AI technology that the conference is on Sunday, it's really about this. How are we going to use this? Are we going to use chat box, whatever it's called, to write PhD theses? Or are we going to use this technology for the betterment of people? Technology is neutral. And it's a gift.
I'm not buying in that entirely, but it's not the topic for today. I think technology is not exactly neutral, but also you can have technology to perpetuate life when life is actually quite, the quality of life is actually quite problematic. So you can still keep people live for a long time beyond their capacities, right?
Correct.
So, and that's part of the problem of end of life issues.
And the beauty of our tradition is it says that that in those circumstances, the greater mitzvah may be to, as the Talmud says, allow the flame of life to flicker out in dignity and in sanctity. And that, when the arsenal, in the workshop we do on end of life, when the arsenal of medical technology has been exhausted, then you move into a different category of how you deal with a human being. And I mean, this is why we don't teach this enough to our people, because the tradition is rich in this. I mean, the technology conversation is fascinating to me, especially now. I mean, there's so much happening. It's just fascinating. And it is a challenge to see how we, as we'll see Sunday, how we as a Jewish tradition and faith tradition understands this, incorporates this, and use it for blessing rather than not blessing. It's fascinating. Yeah. It's fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Anyway,
do we have other comments or other concerns that are from Susan Diamond?
Yeah.
I don't think that he can respond beyond what he said, that Susan, if you can please put your contact information so that Rabbi Adras could reach out to you directly, that would be very useful. I think.
Because it says please look at the chat, but it's not in the chat. I don't see your.
Yeah, it's not. I don't see it either.
Okay, and I can also send you her contact information.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. And we have no questions in the Q&A.
Yeah.
Well, let me do this before we leave here.
Oh yeah, she put her Susan put her email in the.
Okay, I'm just putting in on the chat. I think it's webinar chat. my email in case you want to reach out, or anybody here. And if you'll send me Susan's, because I can't see it here.
Yeah,
Okay.
if you scroll down on the Q&A, you'll see her
Oh,
email.
on the Q and
I'll
A.
send it, I'll send it to you, don't worry. about it.
Yeah. And she's
Oh, okay.
definitely very interested in speaking with you.
Okay, wait a minute. Oh, there you go. I was in the chat and you were in the Q and A. You know, Susan, this talk about technology. All right, just let me write this down. You're a Yahoo. Okay, yahoo.com. Okay, so oh, in San Mateo, know it well. Next week, here's the coming attractions. This is a theological foundation. So next week, we're going to take a look at our tradition's approach to health and wellness. There is a fantastic series of midrash, one in particular, that really sets the stage of why it is so important to take care of your body. And it goes to that Exodus 3 chapter in our relationship with the sacred. We're going to take a look at that and some of Maimonides, which will blow you away. The 12th century and how modern this Maimonides is, especially in the concept of caregiving and exercise. And then we're going to take a look at the text that introduced the concept of mental health within Judaism. There's actually a diagnosis, a mental health diagnosis in the Talmud centuries ago. And this has even more profound, and some of the language in the Talmud that it's used. And then in 2 weeks, we'll finish up with this unbelievable stuff on rituals, which will just blow you out of the water. Some of this stuff, it's beautiful. Some of it's very tough, very tough. But some of the language and poetry and rituals, I'm very anxious to get your take on some of this stuff that's emerging very, very rapidly in our community.
Great. We have some question from Amira de la Garza. If you can see it in the chat. If
So
you go
much of
back to
how
the
we
chat, do you see that?
between mind and body. I wonder if the formula you shared integrates consciousness with the idea of choice. Oh, muy bien. That's a conversation we should have. The short answer is yes.
Yes.
The short answer is yes. And then the commentary to the answer will take quite a while. But Amira, this whole Judaism, as I hope will relate to next week, is a holistic medical model. When you get to Maimonides, you'll see this next week. We understand that the integration of the mind, the body, and the soul is essential to who we are. We are not a Western model where there's a one section, there's mind's here and the body's there, and never the twain shall meet. But we understand there's a tremendous intersection and linkage between the mind and the body and the soul, and we pray for it. This is a thing in the prayer book. If you go to the morning service, there's a couple of, I'll do this real fast because we're going to run out of time. There's a prayer in the morning service, the daily service, what we call the veins and arteries prayer. And basically it says we give thanks that the stuff that should open up in our body opens, and the stuff that closes, because if one of them should happen to fail, we would be unable to stand in life before God. That's the bathroom prayer of the Jew. That's we say you should, because you think about it, if the stuff that's supposed to open doesn't, and vice versa, we would be in, as we say in the Talmud, deep doo-doo. Yes, tzuris. That's the other version. And then the next page in many of the prayer books, at least in our prayer book, is Elohai neshama shenatata bi tahora. The soul which you have given me is pure, and I know at one time it's going to be taken away from me. Body, soul, linked together. The ve'ahavta, right after the Shema, you're supposed to love God with your mind, your body, and your soul, all together, integrated.
Mhm.
You could build a whole curriculum around this integration of mind, body, and soul by just in the prayer book. It's fascinating. So that's why the answer to your question, the short answer to your question is yes. And in the Jewish community contemporarily, if that's a word, you have this real resurgence of mindfulness issues. In fact, I have a very, very good friend of mine, Steve Cohen, who has created a whole mindfulness for business, mindfulness for leadership. And I've taken a mindfulness class with another friend of mine, Hope, who teaches this in South Jersey. And if you look at the some of the books that have come out of the mindfulness movement, is very, very heavily Jewishly nuanced in a way that. So the answer to your question is yes.
Now let's go back to the Q&A because you've got more questions there.
Okay. It's such a good reminder to find the profound and most mundane of I look at the future. Oh, thank you, Amira. Thank you very much.
Oh, I guess most of them are from Susan Diamond.
Okay. So, all right, listen. So I hope you got something out of these texts, and that's the foundation for the next 2 weeks. And we'll explore some of us. It's really fascinating. The challenge, the sadness about all this, we don't teach our people enough about all this stuff because you really get an appreciation for the power and of our tradition on an adult level, on spiritual maturity, not, as my professor Larry Hoffman calls it, pediatric Judaism. That's why so many of us of a certain age are shying away from, because we don't need pediatric Judaism anymore. We want adult answers and stuff that we're dealing with, such as what we're talking about today. So thank you very much for your attention. I appreciate it. I hope to see all of you next Monday, same time, same station, at noon your time, 2:00 East Coast time, if I've got that correct.
And that's right. And I remind all of the people on the call that on Sunday, February 26th, we have a whole day conference on Jews, Judaism, and artificial intelligence. And Rabbi Adras will be one of the presenters, but we're going to cover a lot of many dimensions and aspects of this very complicated challenge, how to live with technology, especially artificial intelligence technology. So thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you all on Monday at the same time, noon Arizona time, 2:00 Eastern time. And in the meantime, I wish you a wonderful week for the rest of the week.
Take care, stay safe, stay healthy, everybody.
That's right. Most important. Thank you, Richard. This was fabulous.
Thank you.
It really worked